So Erica, thanks for agreeing to do this interview. This isn't our first rodeo. For people who really want to get some background on you, they can listen to the New Note podcast we did, what, 2 years ago?
Was it 2 years ago? You're
Probably.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. So I did an extensive interview of your whole life. So for people who want that, they can find that podcast or find it on SoundCloud. I think it's out there too. So anyway, so we want to focus on this top line since you're an economics person, accountant by background, and education training and so much more. I've been CFOs in companies. I wanted to look at the top line, earning money in businesses and managing money as a topic for the culture of health leaders, and get some insights from you on that whole process as well as other things. But before we jump into that, let's give people like the basics. So your name, you're retired now, so title, not quite sure what that means, but you know, and what you're doing now. So yeah, why don't you do that?
Sure. My name is Erica Crenshaw, and my background is actually finance, not accounting.
My bad.
I wish I was smart enough to do accounting, but I'm a finance person. And I started my career off at Goldman Sachs as an investment research analyst. And then, you know, I love finance. I love talking about it. Cash flow statements light me up. And so this has been my world, and I've tried to help companies manage their money well, and also manage not just their top line, but their bottom line.
Excellent. So how did you get into the space of finance?
I got into the space. Well, I always knew that I wanted to do something in business. When I was probably 8 or 9 years old, I used to write checks to my stuffed animals. And at the time, I thought that I wanted to actually be an accountant until I went to Florida A&M and discovered finance. I actually started investing when I was 16, started investing into a small value fund. And that money manager actually became a mentor of mine. He was my first mentor. And then my second mentor was a guy by the name of Daryl Williams in the School of Business at Florida A&M University. And I would just hang out in his office and we would talk about stocks. I also joined the investment club at Florida A&M. And so that was it. And I enjoyed it. I still enjoy it. I enjoyed reading the Wall Street Journal. I enjoyed looking at CNBC when most kids were probably watching videos. Not that I didn't watch my share of videos, because I did. But I also enjoyed just learning about capital markets.
Wow, heavy. I didn't know the part about you writing checks to your stuffed animals.
Oh, yes. Yeah, well, that was it. Yeah. Writing checks, playing with the calculator. I just loved it all.
I'm assuming did they pay you back?
You know, I don't think so, but I'm a couple of them probably cash those checks though.
That is so funny. I love it. So where'd you grow up, Erica?
I grew up in Prince George's County, Maryland, in a town called Cheltenham, Maryland, which is about 20 minutes from the Virginia line. And I call that, growing up in PG County was a bubble for me, to have African Americans that were just basically running the county, and seeing Black professionals just managing and doing and running. And it's kind of like Atlanta is now. When you walk around, it's nothing but Black professionals, and you're talking about middle to upper middle class Black professionals. So I appreciate growing up in Prince George's County, and then having traveled to various countries around the world, and obviously been living in different parts of the United States. I think I didn't appreciate it at the time, but I really value what it means to really grow up and be a part of a stable community, and one where you see people like you making decisions and really advancing from a wealth standpoint and prosperity standpoint.
Excellent. So how did you end up at Goldman Sachs on Wall Street? How did you get into the, going from Florida A&M, did you go straight to Wall Street?
So So I was a part of the 5-year MBA program at Florida A&M. At the time, I thought, I guess my freshman sophomore year, I thought I may have wanted to go to law school. And then I quickly discovered that there were a lot of lawyers out there, and I would decided to go directly to Wall Street. Um, I had several internships while at Florida A&M, and all of them were at financial firms. So after business school, I started at Goldman on the sales side, covering manufacturing stocks. I did have offers from 2 other companies, and that really is a testament, not necessarily to me, but also to the School of Business at Florida A&M. We had companies from major firms from around the country that were recruiting Black college students to work on Wall Street. So I had offers from JP Morgan, Morgan Stanley, and Goldman Sachs, and ended up choosing Goldman.
Gotcha. Excellent. So just thinking about your career, like what was one piece of advice that was given to you that, stuck with you or still sticks with you today from a mentor or anybody?
One advice that I got was to pay yourself first. And that was from Melanie Hobson, who's the president or was the president of Ariel Capital Management. And I think that is important in any line of business that you're in, particularly when you're an entrepreneur. Too often, entrepreneurs, there's a sacrifice obviously that has to be made with entrepreneurs. And there's a sacrifice from a financial standpoint, there's a sacrifice from your family and your time. But paying yourself first took me a long way, because even if it's a modest amount, paying yourself and seeing that build over time helps your psyche. Even if it's a modest amount, I always suggest now to folks not just to pay yourself first, but pay yourself, save. If you could save 100% of it, great. If not, save a portion of it and allow that to build into an account. Because even if the venture fails, you will have something to take away from it.
Gotcha. Excellent. So that's on the wisdom side. So from a core side, so you're the youngest person I know. I won't give your age out, but you're retired and you don't have any gray hair, right? So
I do have some gray. Color is good. Mr. Brown is one of my best friends. Or Miss Claire.
Yeah. So, you've run a few successful companies that I know of. And after, you've sold them off, like what are 1 or 2 transferable pieces to that you would offer to culture of health leaders from the standpoint of starting companies and maintaining and then selling them?
So in terms of starting companies and maintaining, I would say 1, make certain that you research the industry. Know what you're getting yourself into. So thoroughly research the industry. Make certain that you have a professional who is versed in building models, but building financial models that are realistic, which is important. I have never met an entrepreneur who didn't think that they had a great model and that their revenues were just going to shoot up like a hockey stick. And that rarely ever happens. And then also, I would say, make certain that you hire top talent. I think too often folks, and top talent meaning that whether you're selling widgets or whether you are consulting, make certain that you hire talent that's going to execute well. I think too often, particularly budding entrepreneurs, like to focus on the furnishings or having a class or being a part or having an office in a class A building. All of that is great, but you have to be able to manage your fixed costs. And if you're not managing your fixed costs well, then you end up going out of business, or you're highly levered and you're strangling yourself and you can't actually reinvest in the company. So hiring top talent, if you think about fixed costs, you have to have some. Having top talent is one of the ones that you actually want to invest in, because having a fancy office can obviously have limitations, but hiring top talent can improve your success long term.
Excellent. Cool
Yeah.
beans. So some people have argued, you can learn just as much from failure as you can from success. And have you had any, failures or missteps maybe that you've learned from that you can pass on to, the culture of health leaders that they may want to
Oh,
think
sure. I've had tons of failures, but managing those failures is important, and the severity of them. I would say one failure that I didn't learn until after uh, launching and then selling the companies was that I actually should have developed an execution strategy at the time of launch. So for Execute Now, when we sold Execute Now, I knew I wanted to exit. The first company, Amerispec, wasn't sure if I was going to exit because I was young. I bought that company, I must have been 25 years old. So it was kind of 25 years old. Oh, I'm going to have this for the rest of my life. Not so much. And because your interests change. So when I launched Execute Now, I knew that I wanted to exit from it, but I did not map out when. So just like I think about companies, just like I would a stock. And it's best to have discipline around your execution strategy, just like you would when you're selling a stock. So most professionals will tell you to sell your stock when it appreciates by 20%. So at 20%, have the discipline to cash out. You may leave some money on the table, but it's far worse than trying to manage and sell during a downturn, or when the stock declines. So I should have sold a year before I actually sold Execute Now. It was well beyond the 20%, but you start to think that, things are extremely well. I can continue riding this roller coaster. The thing about coasters is that they go up and down. So you have to recognize when you've either reached a peak, and if you have reached a peak, when you can probably divvy and pivot into another stream of business, but not the same one. So I should have sold a year earlier with Execute Now.
Okay. Good to know. I think we had that discussion in the podcast. You went into detail about the details a lot more. So let's talk about when it comes to managing revenue. Once you've got it in the door, what would you say about how to manage it?
So when you say manage revenue, do you mean just the top line and just managing the top line from an investment standpoint, or what exactly do
I'm just thinking if you're running a company and let's say, you got a contract in for $1 million. Okay. Like you said, you've got fixed costs that are fixed costs. You've got staff, you've got, other overhead. What have you seen in the couple of companies that you've run in terms of managing those dollars effectively? Yep. Do you cut? Do you squirrel away? How do you do that?
Right. So I'll tell you what I have done, and I'll tell you what I advise, and I'll tell you what I've seen. Okay. So I'll start with what I've seen. So what I generally see when people get a windfall in terms of whether it could be a large contract or just a general increase in revenue. The first instinct is to spend it. That's generally has always been, from what people that I've talked to, the first instinct is to spend it, and spending it generally on talent. We need to ramp up talent. That's how we're going to spend this money. Sometimes that needs to be the case. But anytime you're ramping up your costs, it has to be in a thoughtful way. So the question becomes, I have an increase in revenue. Why do I need to increase the spending? And if I need to increase the spending because this business takes a lot of human capital, so I need to hire more people. Um, you need to think, internally, is there someone I can promote if you have employees first before actually going out and having to incur the cost of recruiting someone? If you don't have the talent in-house to do so, I generally say take your time in hiring that new talent, and make certain that you've negotiated their package well. Because what we know about increases in revenue is that they come in ebbs and flows. So you may have an increase in revenue in March, the contract could be for a year, and you may not have another contract for another 24 months, or at least a large contract for another 24 months. But what you do have is additional fixed costs. Okay. And then, when you have that revenue, is what I generally advise people, because this is what we did, which was we would take 20% of that revenue and save it. Okay. 20% of it, go ahead and save it, sock it away. If it's coming on a monthly basis, 20%, whatever the 20% is, on a monthly, weekly, annual, one time, take that and put it in some kind of rainy day fund, a savings, actual savings. So that's the best way to manage your top line. Yeah. I was
Okay.
thinking of something else, but it just escaped me. So I may come back to that.
Sure. So let me ask this question. So for people who, cultural health leaders who may be thinking about running a nonprofit and get grant dollars, and the trick to grants are typically they want you to zero those out, right? By the end of the grant period, you can't pocket away 20% of it, right? You have to burn it all off, or they won't give you another grant. Sometimes they'll let you keep 10% of it to roll over, but technically you are supposed to spend 100% of what you bring in. How does that model work with nonprofits who are pledged to, from the grant dollars? Donations different, but yeah.
So, grant the whole nonprofit space is a tricky one, because it's difficult to get money if you don't have money. But at the same time, they want you to try to spend down. Most grant makers that I'm aware of don't want you to spend down 100%. You're usually able to keep a percentage of it. I can't remember the terminology that they use, but you're usually able to keep a percentage of it. And most grant makers want to know not that you necessarily spent the money, they want to understand how you spent the money, how you've deployed that money, and has it made an impact in the community. Okay, how many lives have changed as a result of them giving you this money, and have you managed it well? Because as we know, going back to the well to a grant maker every year can be a toss up. You may get new dollars, and oftentimes when you get new dollars, it may not be at the same level. So having multiple streams of income, particularly when you are a nonprofit, is key. So if you have a grant maker that says you need to zero out these dollars, it will behoove you as the CEO of the nonprofit to have funds from donations, fee for service, have those additional funds that you can actually save and use the grant money for operations.
Right. So, you may know or remember that I'm pretty much a movie buff. I love, that's my pastime. So I've got, I think, over 1,100 movies. So I love quoting movies. So one that comes to mind, Ronin, is one of my favorite movies with Robert De Niro. And there's a scene in it where he says, I never walk into a place that I don't know how to walk out of.
Mm.
And this kind of speaks to your earlier point about, you know, as I think about Execute Now, because that's when I met you, but you had your other company in New York that you just talked about when you started at 25. And my question was, you know, did you start those companies with an exit strategy in mind? I think you've kind of already answered that to some
Right.
degree.
Yeah.
So thinking back to that reality, would you recommend that anybody that's starting, whether it's an entrepreneur or in a, you know, a nonprofit or whatever, that they should walk into starting a business with an exit in mind?
Yeah, that is my recommendation. However, there are businesses that have been managed by one person for many years, and that get passed down from generation to generation. Um, from my standpoint, yes, I do think if you plan to exit, and that exit could mean selling the business, or the exit could mean handing it down to your children. Either way, it is a personal exit from the business. I think it's a smart move to, as I stated before, to have that exit strategy when you actually launch it. So just like the same level of detail that you put into launching the business, that same level of detail should be put into what is the exit strategy going to look like. Does that mean going public? Does that mean raising uh, additional capital for another line of business? Does that mean hiring another partner to help you? So you have to imagine how your business is going to evolve and whether you want to be a part of that evolution.
Got you. So would you recommend, you know, every entrepreneur take this approach? I mean, is there some intrinsic value or advantage to this strategy? I think
To
most people don't think about it. They start a business at 25, 28,
Yeah.
and
So the advantage I think to thinking through an exit strategy is particularly if you want to sell. So with Execute Now, I knew I wanted to sell the business, and I said I'm going to sell the business in 5 years, which I did. I sold the business in 5 years. The problem is that I should have sold it in 4 years. And so having a thoughtful strategy laid out doesn't necessarily put a number on when you want to exit, like a year, if you will, but it should be around certain metrics. Okay, performance metrics as it relates to the business, and that determines whether you should actually exit versus saying I want to sell the business in 5 years, which is what I did. But having the discipline around looking at certain metrics as it relates to the business to determine when to sell it, okay, or when to take it to potentially to another level or starting a new line of business, a complementary line of business.
okay.
Mhm.
So yeah, I wanted to, when I met you with Execute Now was 20, what was it, 2013
Uh,
maybe?
Let me see. Yeah, maybe. Yeah, because we launched in 11 and sold in 16. So yeah, it was probably around 13.
Yeah. So you've said a couple of times I should have, you know, bounced 4 years in versus 5 years.
Mhm.
Um, what was magic about 4 years in that when you look back in hindsight, 5 years in, you're like, ugh, I should have sold this, you know, a year ago.
So we wildly exceeded our expectations from a revenue standpoint.
In
And
year four or year five? I'm sorry.
year four,
Okay.
we had major contracts with school districts. It was just, we were already ramping up to that point, but it was, yeah, it was the revenue, we exceeded our expectations. And I had not necessarily planned for that level of success at that time. I was thinking that we would get it more in year 5. And then that's when we would, because most businesses generally start reaching their peak levels around year 5. We just reached in year 4. It's usually year 5 to 7. That's when they start reaching their peak. We reached it in year 4, which was great. And so in my mind, I'm thinking, well, year 5 is going to be better than year 4, right? Um, they, what ended up happening was that year 5 wasn't as great as year 4 because there were some changes at the Department of Education. And so that meant going out and doing more business development. And by that time, I knew that I wanted to start something new. I knew I wanted to do something different. We were moving to North Carolina, so the timing of all that worked. And then I got a diagnosis. Subsequently, this was a month after we ended up selling. But yeah, I think you definitely have to look at certain metrics. I think that's important. Managing your business and not, when I say managing your business, managing it from a high level is important. So many entrepreneurs and business owners are so focused on the weeds that they miss the high level. And what really helped us to focus on the high level, it's kind of back to one of your other questions in terms of one of the things that you can do that's transferable, is having a board of advisors, just like you would have a board of directors. We had a board of advisors for Execute Now, which forced me to focus at a high level because I would present at board meetings. And the board wants to understand what's happening in the business from, 50,000 square feet. Okay. They don't care so much about the day to day. They want to know strategically what's happening in the business from 50,000 square feet. And they want to know what's coming next. So, yeah, so that's one of the changes that we should have done. And when you think about executing, it's really looking at the metrics of the business and understanding where you are now and kind of where you want to be or where you should be.
So since you've been on, Wall Street, and this is all part of the same, it's a little off my questions, but it's so intriguing is, as you think about entrepreneurs, business owners, and this, FOMO, fear of missing out, like you said, he's like, wow, if we blew up in 4 years, 5 is going to be even better. I think some people may think, well, if I sell now and I look back and it's like, oh, I sold too early, I could have made even more money. So it's like people keep holding and something changes and maybe it is better or maybe it's worse. So how would you address this fear of missing out phenomenon? I guess most people just have it.
Yeah. And I think that's always the case. I mean, you never know. I mean, as you know, I have a discerning spirit, so I pray about everything. And we've talked about that before. But I think, there's just like with a stock with the 20% rule, there is always the case that this stock is going to appreciate more than 20%. The question becomes, and say it does, you generally will leave some money on the table, particularly if the stock is doing phenomenal. You're generally going to leave some money on the table. The question becomes when it takes a turn, because it will, nothing just goes up and never comes down, right? It's virtually impossible. How will you feel? And are you able to manage the downturn of particular risk? I think too often people hold on to something too long. And I'll tell you one of the reasons why I made a change in my thinking from the first company in terms of having no exit strategy and thinking I was going to have it forever, to the second company having an exit strategy, really had to do with reading an article by Robert Johnson, BET. When he sold BET to Viacom, I know for certain the Black community was just up in arms. How could he do that? Why is he doing that? How could he sell, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, right? The fact of the matter is that people have other interests. No one says I have to be the only owner of this venture. And no one says that I can't start something else and be as successful or more successful because I now have a track record, right? So there's nothing wrong with transitioning and changing your mind or your appetite or your desires. The question becomes, when will you do it? And I have complete peace of mind about selling when I did sell. The question you asked me, was there a mistake? Yes, that was a mistake, but I still sleep at night. I still sold the business, right? I still took away, money. I was still able to cash out. And so, yes, did I miss some upside? Sure, I did. There's no question about it. I missed some upside. The question becomes, what do I do and what did I do with the money that I received from the sale of the business, right? And most people will use that to reinvest into another business.
Excellent.
So it's so easy to be greedy, and it's so easy to focus on what you've missed versus appreciating what you actually received.
Yeah, I love it. I had a colleague tell me once in college, he was 10 years older than us. I might have said it on our podcast interview. He said about a purchase that I had done, he said, brother, you got what you wanted when you wanted it. Don't worry about, all the other factors I was kind of going through my head, but I was 20 years old, right? So it was he was 28. He was such a guru at 28.
He's a wise old sage.
He was the old guy in the studio. So yeah, the world has changed. It's all relative. Yeah. So can you give the culture of leaders, culture of health leaders, give them one or two examples or models of growing or leveraging limited financial resources?
When you have limited financial resources, you have to myopically manage your fixed costs because you have limited resources. And I think that goes back to my earlier comment about how you choose to spend your money and what you choose to spend your money on, and where you choose to invest it. Are you going to invest into or spend it on a Class A building with nice furnishings and fancy paintings? So when people come walk through the doors, they have this is a beautiful space. Or are you going to spend it on talent, which is going to help you increase your revenue and hopefully your bottom line? So I think, for certain, when you have limited resources, spend it on talent all day, every day. Spend it on good people, train good people, good employees, people who are going to help you advance your mission and advance your business.
Great. So let's talk about resilience for a hot minute. So understanding that leaders are always going to have to deal with some scheduled disaster or unscheduled disaster, navigate a crisis.
Mm-hmm.
What kind of counsel would you give in terms of, impact and dealing with unscheduled disasters? What should a business owner?
Like a global pandemic?
Yeah, or a flood, or a scheduled disaster like the Olympics are coming in 18 months and the world is going to be on our front door.
Right.
Oh my God, what are we going to do?
Exactly. Well, it's so interesting because I think every company is managing this disaster, right? Those that are winning are ones who have shored up their balance sheet, meaning that they have strong balance sheets. They have liquid assets on their balance sheets. They are liquid. Those are the companies that are winning. We see it in every downturn. Businesses go through cycles. So if you don't prepare for the downturn, which is a cycle in your business, then you will be caught, you're caught struggling and you're vulnerable. You're vulnerable for a takeover. You're vulnerable to go out of business. Okay. Which goes back to the earlier comment when you talked about the windfall of the revenue, or it's not really not a windfall of cash, but the revenue, which goes back to why 20% is important. Okay. Which goes back to why paying yourself first is important. Because if you manage and mind your business during the good times, you won't be as vulnerable during the bad times. It's just as simple as that. This isn't rocket science. This is wisdom, right? This is discipline. So for those that, if you want to be resilient, you need to have cash to be resilient. It's just as simple as that. Yes, you can get the PPP loan, right? That you may or may not have to pay back. But the question becomes, if you did not have that, where would you be? If that dries up, because it will, where will you be? Will you be able to get new contracts? That should be looked at as a bridge loan, right? Gap funding. Okay. When you're on the other side of the bridge, are you still in the same place? Or have you advanced using the gap funding advancing that will give you some time to get new revenue or get new clients? So the companies that do well are liquid. They're liquid. They have at least a year or two of cash on hand. Okay. Those that aren't, either they have couple things. Either you have a year or two of cash on hand, or you have access to capital. Okay. Access to capital meaning something beyond the PPP. And generally, people who have access to capital, which goes back to the other point I made, it's easier to get money when you have money. So people who generally have access to capital already have capital. This is just how it works. This is how society works. So the sooner you recognize that, understand that, and exercise discipline, and shoring up your balance sheet, you will fare a lot better in a down market that could come out of nowhere.
Sure.
Yeah.
And there are always down markets and scheduled disasters. Like my father told me, we're both architects. He said, son, every 10 years, the economy goes through a recession, pretty much. And with us, architecture, construction, those are the indicators. They're the first hit. People stop building. They stop, if you're not building, you don't need to be designing anything, right? And and it's, 2008, 2009 hit. Now COVID is unique, but it's been 10 years.
Yeah, it's been 10 years. Yeah, exactly. And it's unfortunate how people, every down cycle, someone's getting caught off guard. But historically, there's no reason that, that's the situation. That's the case. People always think they have a little more time, or, next year or the next contract, I'll say 20%, or the next. Sometimes you don't have a next. So you have to have the discipline to do it, to take the appropriate steps when the time presents itself. So, yeah.
Excellent. So we're right at about 45 minutes. So is there anything that, we missed, that a question I should have asked you, or something that's burning that you want to offer to the culture of health leaders as a takeaway? Last thoughts?
Let's see. I would say these were great questions. So thank you so much for the opportunity to share. I would say whatever your business is, be sure that you develop it. Spend time really kind of developing it and execute your strategy well before you decide to venture into even just another line of business, or before you decide to ask for additional capital. And I think too often entrepreneurs want to move really fast, as if the house is burning down. People are always thinking about competition. So I absolutely get that, particularly if you're in the tech space. But you want to be sure that you are using the investments well. And so there's a, you know, in um, CFOs use a ratio called is a return on invested capital. And that just really means if I am giving you $1,000, I want to see my $1,000 add value. I want to see my $1,000 add value to the company. So that means investing in something that's going to add value and not destroy value. And you can destroy value if you are not investing the money wisely, or you're not investing the money into a project or an idea that has very little demand, which goes back to what I stated earlier. Make certain that you research your industry well, make certain that there's demand for what you're selling. Because if there's not demand for what you're selling, you can think you have the best idea on the face of the earth, but if nobody's buying it, no one's buying it, and you need to pivot. You need to pivot quickly, because if not, you're destroying value in your company. And so that would be my last bit of advice. Failing fast is important. Having the demand there is important, particularly with startups. Focusing on the top line is extremely important. And then getting to a point where you can then begin managing expenses and increasing your bottom line.
Okay. So just for people who may not understand, define top line versus bottom line.
Top line is your revenue, and your bottom line is your net income.
Gotcha.
Okay. Your net income is revenue minus expenses.
Gotcha. Okay.